If you smoke weed, there's a high chance that you have shame and guilt in your mind. Not definite, but a super high chance. Not only in your mind, but also in your body. Sometimes it's noticeable, like if someone has a relationship with the plant where at the end of the day, they smoke a little bit, but maybe just a thought pops up every now and then, like, what am I doing with my life and stuff like that. This is an echo of part of that guilt. But for some people, you don't even notice it. It's not seen. I know for me, I never noticed it, but it shows up in ways that you can see that's what's going on. And I'm going to dive more into that in this video. The good news is this isn't a problem that needs to be fixed. It's actually a sign and opportunity for growth, for deeper introspection, because these are essentially dormant emotions that get brought forth to the surface with cannabis being a part or being in your life. I used to think this was just a thing that happens in the US, but after working with people from all over the world, I can tell you it happens all over the world. And there's two big reasons that play into why shame shows up in our experience with our plant, with the plant, our plant, the plant, shame and guilt. There's two core reasons I've seen that show up. The first source I feel was a massive contributor to the bulk of the shame and guilt that I had, which bled into my relationship with the plant. But it was just the kind of things that I was told growing up, or the kind of things that my parents would say to me, right? Like, for instance, hey, you need to go apologize to your sister. You should be ashamed of yourself. Look what you did, things like that. And when you understand, like, how our nervous system is working to come online in the early years of our life, and how these initial belief layers and perspectives about ourselves are formed in our world, it's like we're sponges, right? There's this echo of shame around just being me that was there for a fucking long time. And so when cannabis first came into my life, I was getting a lot of these signs that I now see in the clients that I work with, but I didn't know what the fuck was going on. Like, I just felt off, and, I felt disconnected, but I didn't have like a label on what it was. So that's one of the core sources, is just how we were talked to by our parents, by caretakers, aunts, uncles, and friends too. And I've mentioned this in another video. You think about the friends that you grew up around, they were all, kind of conditioned by their environments, and then you bring it all together and that's what you get. And most people, they got a lot of that growing up. You should be ashamed of yourself, like that kind of stuff. Now I'll say, this isn't anything against any particular parent or parent group. Most of our parents were not effectively or efficiently trained on how to teach and parent emotional regulation and emotional resilience, which is, many people say, is the highest form of intelligence. Then you lay on the cultural stigma that's been conditioned into us around the plant as a whole. A lot of, well, if you're going to smoke weed, you're going to be lazy. You're not going to amount to anything. Oh, are you still smoking weed? Like all that kind of stuff that is, again, echoes from people outside of us. And oftentimes they're not even aware of their own levels of conditioning around this plant. But when you look deeper into the history of the plant and the more sound-minded science around the plant, you find, hey man, there's really nothing to be all worked up about here. It could be argued that a lot of people's relationship with coffee is more unhealthy than one's relationship with cannabis. And then I'm going to bring one more thought in here too. If you ever heard, like, carcinogens aspect, like that kind of stuff, how that can be detrimental to you. Here's one fact that blew my mind when I discovered it, right? Big reframe. Someone who is lonely and really feels that loneliness in their life, in their daily life, that does not say, it's the stats from cigarettes, that does not smoke cigarettes, which has carcinogens in it, has a lower life expectancy than someone who smokes 15 cigarettes a day, I think is what it is, right? And when I heard that, I took into that, all right, well, with cannabis, like, there's obviously not all the harmful shit that they put in a lot of the cigarettes. It's a plant from the earth. So is there combustion? Yes. But, when you look at like what's really going on, if you have a relationship with the plant and you feel guilty about it, you can think that you have this addiction. Addiction is, the definition is essentially behavior that is repeated despite negative consequence. If the negative consequence is related to how we feel and how we feel when we interact with the plant and our levels of motivation and clarity and all these things, then that can be taken care of. That can be dissolved and resolved. But it's understandable considering our history and what we've all navigated emotionally, different levels of trauma, that we have this tendency to seek comfort, whether consciously or unconsciously. But these deeper layers of shame, and if you're on board with a little bit of the woo-woo, the idea of manifestation, two of the biggest blockers around manifestation are resentment and the need of forgiveness, which coincide with guilt and shame. These layers are the biggest blockers to realizing manifestation. And I did another video about that. If you're curious on manifestation, you can check it on my little page there. All right, if we step a little bit back off the woo-woo, which there's nothing wrong with the woo-woo. There's a lot of the woo-woo out there that's true. But if we step away from the woo-woo for a moment and we look at the science aspect of this, the emotion of shame lights up the same areas of our brain as when we have social threat in our life, which includes the amygdala and the anterior cingulate. And when this is happening, our brain and nervous system in the background shift into protection mode, which oftentimes contributes to less motivation, feeling foggy, and lacking mental clarity. Cannabis also lowers the brain's filtering system, which means that when you have it in your life, the things that historically have been suppressed come to the surface. There's also, you could say, a third source that shame can come from with cannabis being in your life. Even if you've done the inner work and you have a regulated nervous system and feel clear about everything, environment plays a massive role. And there's layers of environment. It could be related to your work, and it could be related to relationships. There's a lot of different factors. But we'll say, like, if you work a job that you could say is okay, like if someone asks you, like, hey, how's your job? Do you like your job? And you're like, oh yeah, no, it's a good job. I like it. It's good. It does the stuff. It pays the bills, the sort of thing. If it's not fulfilling, that can contribute to a little bit of shame. Because again, it's bringing what's deeper, a repressed, emotion or thought structure around, man, I really want to do X, Y, Z in my life. But because we've taken on all this shame and guilt, we don't even see it consciously. I know for me, an example of this, I've mentioned to a lot of the people I've worked with, my sister at one point came to me and asked me why I kept going after a particular type of corporate job, sales, basically sales in corporations and working for other corporations, right? And I told her it's because this is a reputable path of career. There's a lot of stigma around the salesperson, but if you're not a sleazy used car salesperson, you can help a lot of people in the field of sales if you find an aligned product and work your way up. And when she said that to me, that was kind of my response, right there what I just said. When she said that to me, that's how I responded. I wasn't irate. I wasn't like, you're wrong or nothing like that. This is very matter of fact. But the reality is, what she had pointed out was that I was just doing it to appease my dad, right? And I was like, no, that's not it, right? But turns out that's exactly what was going on, but I didn't see it consciously. It wasn't until down the road that I made that realization, or I had that realization, So how things can be in the background, in the subconscious, but just we don't even see them on the forefront. It's bananas, but it's a real thing. And that's why I've been so fascinated with the subconscious mind ever since I began really documenting my journey of self-development. So that's a big one. Does the work that you do really fulfill you? And if not, would it be possible to make adjustments, maybe begin watering a new plant on the side, a new garden on the side that inspires you? You're going to get a lot of good juice and momentum and mental clarity just by having something that tickles that part of yourself, that lifts you up, that excites you. But back to what other areas of environment related to your relationships, man, that's a huge one. If you have a roommate or you're in a relationship, whatever the dynamic, and it's draining, the individual is likely commonly in a negative mindset, or they are judging others, or they are gossiping. It's just something about their energy, and it drains you, right? When you pair that with cannabis, there's a level of a resilient mind where you can manage waters like that more effectively and it not derail you. It just depends on where you are. So if you're someone who's in a scenario where it's like, yeah, you know what, I feel you on the job thing, but this is my job and this is what I'm doing. In relationship, there's a little bit of that, but hey, I'm not in a position to change these things right now. then like if I was to work with you, if we were working together one-on-one, I would say it might be beneficial for you to work towards taking a break off of cannabis. Excluding medicinal patients and stuff like that. I'm not a doctor. I'm just saying for mindset, if you're in that space, that's what I would likely recommend. Trying to do some kind of a gradual wean off, and get to where you are clear without it. Now, if your relationships, if you look at the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and you're like, yeah, no, it's all good. Like, people are uplifting. They're not belittling. They're not condescending. They're not judging. They're not always talking about stuff in the news, and that's good. Then great. And you look at your job and you're like, you know what? Could I do something else? Yes, but my job does light me up. I'm very excited to help the people I get to work with and be there for the people I get to work with. If all that's good, then the first 2 layers of shame that I discussed in this, it'd be beneficial to work through if you haven't already done it yourself, and there's many different ways to do that. I do have a guide you can download that's free to download, which lays out the foundation of how I begin to work with anybody that I begin to work with. And there's elements in that help in these areas, but it might be beneficial to look into different journaling practices, something called shadow work. If shadow work sounds bananas, look deeper into it. I used to have resistance to it, but it's a thing, and it's super, super beneficial. And all of this relates to neural networks and neural pathways. I used to be so, analytical. It's got to make sense, and also super judgmental, right? So if someone came to me and was like, you just got to be positive all the time, I'd be like, get the fuck out of here, right? But when you look at the science of how thoughts and emotions correlate to neural networks and neural pathways, and how essentially when you find stagnation in your life, you can find an area of deeply embedded neural networks and neural pathways around those things, and begin to practice awareness around when it emerges, and beginning to write new neural networks and neural pathways with your intention and with your focus. This is why meditation is so powerful, but you don't have to be, a monk to get the benefits of it. You just got to begin to practice and incorporate mindfulness in your life, especially if you have cannabis in your life, because of what we're bringing to the surface here, it brings to the surface what is deeper. There's a lot of people I've gotten to know and meet in my work that they end up taking a break from the plant. They end up finding a lot of clarity, and they feel more motivated, and they're off to the races in their life. And for a lot of people, that works, but it's a spiritual plant. So the stuff that pops up, whether it's shame or any other form of resistance or guilt in your life around cannabis, it's not a problem. It's the plant showing you where you can grow.